Much of the business of archaeology involves working in places with low probability of containing archaeological sites. The probability is low but greater than 0, and therefore government agencies require professional surveys in order to find any possible sites and to manage them accordingly when constructing a road, installing a utility line, or clearing land for a new housing project. In archaeology, a low probability area could be a place where very few sites ever had existed, or it could be a place where sites did exist in the past, yet they have not been preserved in large quantity. In either of those scenarios, a site could be somewhere within an area, but the probability of encountering a site is low when looking at any single random point within the larger area. A random search for a site can be productive. However, given the nature of how probability works, a low probability area would require intensive effort to ensure that any possible site can be identified. Generally speaking, sites are not distributed randomly. Even within an overall low probability area, at least some smaller spots could be more likely to contain a site, usually associated with a localized variation in the landscape or maybe associated with a traditional place name. Here, I will share one example in the Northern Limestone Plateau of Guam that could be instructive for other places. Archaeological sites have been reported in the Northern Plateau, yet the plateau in total is regarded as a low probability area for containing additional sites. The elevated limestone plateau consists of a mostly flat-surfaced terrain with a few scattered localities of undulating high ground and low ground. The terrain's surface mostly is exposed limestone with pockets of rocky silts and clays that rarely are more than 20 centimeters in depth. With these physical circumstances, a surface-oriented survey should be reasonable for identifying most of the sites. Limited surveys so far have found very few numbers of these sites, including the remains of houses of the Lati tradition, concentrations of broken pottery and stone tools, and occurrences of heated rock hearths and other features. Additionally, considerable land disturbance has occurred here during World War II and then during the next decades of land clearing, military buildup, and expanding civilian developments. Many historical or modern sites date to this period, and many of them now are in disturbed or nearly destroyed condition. Much older sites have been found along the coastlines surrounding the elevated limestone plateau. 3 of the region's oldest sites are known here, representing the first time when people ever lived in Guam and the Mariana Islands. Numerous sites of later time periods are distributed all around the coastal fringe. Given the amount of known sites around the coastal perimeter during all known time periods of human presence here, certainly people during those thousands of years had access into the inland plateau area. They may not have created very many large-scale or long-lasting archaeological sites in the plateau, but at least a few sites have been documented in the plateau during the later time periods. In this situation, whenever a new land development project may be proposed in a random locality of the limestone plateau, then the probability is low of encountering a site precisely within any single random locality. If the project encompasses a larger area, then the probability still is low for each particular point within the area, perhaps evaluated as 1%, but the 1% probability is repeated multiple times for each point. The probability remains low overall, but most people would expect to find at least one site when working in large enough of an area. When surveying on the ground in the Northern Plateau, the area overall is homogeneous in terms of presenting a flat-surfaced limestone terrain, and therefore the scattered places of different conditions become obvious. These places could involve patches of higher ground or lower ground, including small cave shelters and sinkholes, as well as the sloped surfaces around them. Additional points of interest are the pockets with a little bit more than usual of sedimentary buildup of a soil layer. All of these occurrences act as natural landmarks, and they potentially could be associated with past cultural use and therefore with archaeological sites. These occurrences are few in number, and they are separated from each other by large areas of the overall typical limestone terrain. These localities tend to be associated with traditional place names and trails shown in older maps, and this information could offer important clues for learning more about the older contexts. Perhaps the most famous site discovery in the Northern Plateau has been known as the NCS Lati site, recorded and preserved during the 1970s within the area that at that time was known as the Naval Communications Station. Even without reading the technical reports on file at government offices and university libraries, people can appreciate experiencing the preserved remains of a traditional Lati house. At the time of this work back in the 1970s, the immediately surrounding area of the Lati already had been affected by massive land clearing during prior decades. In this case, the one Lati house site was preserved, but very likely it had been just one instance among an unknown number of other features that already had been disturbed or destroyed. Given this known finding, documented since the 1970s, similar occurrences can be expected in other isolated localities of the limestone plateau. However, even if they did exist at one time, then they may have been disturbed or possibly destroyed. So far, disturbed and displaced pieces of traditional Lati houses have been reported in just a few locations of the Northern Plateau, usually along the edges of paved roadways or related to large mounds of bulldozed debris clearing piles. These findings indicate that at least a few Lati sites and related features did exist at one time in these particular vicinities, and therefore a few more of these remnants may yet be discovered. In one survey project in the Northern Plateau, I documented 2 pockets of intact sedimentary buildup and soil formations surrounded by extensive post-war era roads, housing foundations, and other infrastructure. Oddly enough, my official scope of work was to document the military infrastructure that already had been well documented in government records, but I noticed that my scope of work allowed for me to explore the intact sedimentary pockets. I explored the subsurface through a series of small test pits. I then created a map to show the distribution of the broken pottery and other findings. I continued with these small test pits until I could confirm 0 findings out to a reasonable distance that could represent the outer boundaries of these 2 sites. The recovered pottery and other objects most likely were from a period of the 1500s through 1600s toward the end of the traditional Lati period. This particular documentation was completed back in the year 2007 and then finalized in 2008 as part of the government planning for military buildup in the Northern Plateau of Guam. One of the most important lessons was to recognize that traditional sites and subsurface layers may yet be found in a few scattered pockets, even among zones of extensive pre-existing disturbance and infrastructure. Since that time, at least a few of the government archaeology projects have called for serious investigations of the subsurface potential in the Northern Plateau. Even with all of these precautions, still a site with a small footprint could be missed, and then the subsurface site layer can be discovered only later, such as during the course of a construction activity, as has happened in the Northern Plateau. Based on these examples, hopefully I have conveyed the major issues about archaeology in a low probability area. What are your thoughts and experiences about working in these kinds of places? Thank you for watching here. I will see you in the next video.